Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Catholic Buzz. So happy that you're joining us here today on episode 15 of the Catholic Buzz. So welcome again. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, thank you for joining us. And my name is Father Daniele, joined always by Josh Sullivan. Josh, how are you doing today?
Good.
Yeah?
Glad to be in the air conditioning.
Yeah, it's actually nice and cool.
It is cool here.
Really hot outside.
Yeah, it is really hot. I've been tanning like crazy outside, and I don't even realize it. Yeah.
I have to tell you, I'm also joined by Matt Van Milligan, and I have to tell Matt a funny story because just last week I was able to be in Sudbury to see my parents, and my mom asked me, "Is Matt a doctor?" Because he talks. He talks with the authority of a doctor. So there you go.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm not a doctor.
You're not a doctor.
Yeah, so the authority is
You
completely
fooled
fake.
my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was, she's maybe
Yeah,
looking.
she's not going to file like a malpractice suit or anything.
I don't
like that.
think
Yeah, okay.
so.
No.
Isn't that hilarious?
That is
though?
funny.
Yeah.
We should just introduce him now as Dr. Matt.
Dr. Matt.
boy, here we
I
go.
was thinking that. Like, we should change our logo and our signs.
It's funny you mentioned that because I was looking for more embarrassing introductions.
Oh my gosh. Dr. Matt.
Dr. Matt.
Yeah. So what's been new? I know some of it's changed in our area. Masks are mandatory when you go to out in public now. I mean, some of us were wearing masks anyways when we were going around, but now they're mandatory.
And I totally agree with that. I got to say, I totally agree with the mask thing. I understand the concept behind it. I just am not the person to wear masks, meaning I go into the store and they tell me to turn around. I have to go back out to my car almost every single time I get into a public place. I swear, I'm going to start like wrapping them around my
Just because
wrists.
you're forgetting
I
it.
just forgetting.
Yeah.
And I walk
Yeah.
in, and then you got that awkward. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. Turn around, and you start walking out. Other people are coming in, and then like you're not supposed to be 6 feet, and all that other like. Oh, what do you do?
Yeah.
It's happened to me multiple times in a day.
You know what's really funny that I'm seeing is now we're all wearing these masks and stuff. Like you don't recognize anyone anymore.
Yeah.
Like I was shopping for groceries and stopped at Canadian Tire for something, and I see people that I know, like parishioners of mine, and I'm like, oh, hello there, and they stare at me like,
They don't know who you are.
who is this stranger saying hi, right? And I pull down my mask and then, oh, Father, I'm so sorry. You just don't know. You don't know who's around you anymore.
We should get them. We should get pictures of our faces and then just print that half on the bottom.
Exactly.
My wife actually had the same thing. So she started working in a healthcare facility, and what she said was like she hasn't known anybody since COVID at this healthcare facility, and so she actually gets shocked sometimes by people coming into lunch and they take off their mask to eat, and you're like, oh, that's what you look like. Like I
So
maybe
true.
picture something different or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. I think that's, and it's going to be like that for a while. We're going to be wearing masks now for a while. Hey? Yeah. So, okay. Anything else that's been happening that's
I was going to say, that's actually, I don't know, did I bring this up before? The mask thing made me realize a little bit about where, because I don't wear masks and I forget about the masks and I go, oh yeah. It's not that I don't want to wear a mask. It's just that I haven't worn a mask or I forgot my mask.
Yeah, we're not in the habit of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I feel judged by mask wearing people.
Yeah. This is before it was mandatory.
This is before it's mandatory.
Yes.
And so it was an interesting concept that I thought of was actually, I wonder if people feel that way about the church sometimes. Not because the people with masks on haven't said anything, haven't done anything, haven't looked at me wrong or anything, but I felt self-consciously guilty for not doing the thing I think in my mind I thought was right, but also supposed to do. Most of the time, I just forgot my mask. But thinking that way, and I wonder if people feel that way about church.
Like, so you're coming to church, you're not used to coming into a Catholic church, you're saying, right?
Yeah.
And so you're thinking maybe by just being an outsider, I guess, are you being judged? Are you being looked at? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Nothing's being said, but if there's just a tacit expectation in the room or in any space you're going that this is what you should do.
I think we feel that anytime we go somewhere that we're not comfortable in, or we're there for the first time, maybe we just have that.
I feel that anytime I leave the house, basically. Fish out of water. Yeah.
Anytime.
So just to make extra aware if you're one of those people that go to church all the time or
Yeah.
whatever else. Like, it is important to reach out and make people feel comfortable at church or wherever you are, and because they might feel self-conscious even though there's nothing for them, like you haven't displayed any reason.
There's no
to make,
reason.
exactly.
Yeah, there's no
You're
reason.
not judging them because they didn't see them on church on Sunday.
Hey, I am all for people making a better effort to make new faces welcome at the parish, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like any parish, when you walk in, it is sort of a nerve-wracking experience when you walk into a church for the first time that you're not familiar with, right? So to have someone say, hello, welcome, what's your name, that sort of thing, totally changes.
Yeah.
You know, rather than just being silent or trying to find...
Walking in and trying to figure out what does this green tape mean on the pews.
Exactly, the green tape. Yes, it's a new way of doing things, right? Okay, today
Talking about new things.
We're talking about new things. We're tackling the subject of the beginning.
The beginning,
right? And I know that there's lots of, I think, misconceptions people have about what Catholics believe about the beginning of the world, the creation of humanity, and all those different things. You know, so I think it's good that we just have a talk about it because there are different theories, right? So there's the Big Bang theory, there's evolution, there's people who stick to other different things. Dr. Matt, you know the title of all these things. But I think it's fair that Catholics should know where we stand.
Yeah. And coming back to what you were saying about the masks, if I can try and redeem that segue, there's an expectation about if you believe in the creation of the world that God created, that there is an implicit conflict with the evolution. Scientific worldview, or just because the scientific worldview has taken such a big hold that it's you're on the outside. If you believe in God, and that there's kind of this tacit expectation that if you believe in one of these things, you can't really believe in the other. So
yeah,
I think we have an
that's
opportunity.
very true because a lot of people just assume Christians believe that God created the world some 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, right? Because of the story.
And literally as the Bible says so. Right. And I think that's where the thing, we were talking a little bit before, is the Bible supposed to be taken literally?
Sections of the Bible are. And that's kind of the thing, that if you come at the Bible with sort of one size fits all hermeneutic, approach to reading and interpretation, you're going to be disappointed by different parts of the Bible. So
it's a collection of books.
Yeah, the genealogies, the Kings and Chronicles, and the historical books of the Bible are meant to be taken as literal history. The poetic books of the Bible are meant to be read as poetry. So kind of a mature reading of Scripture is understanding which way certain books are intended to be read.
Yeah.
So I know before we went on the air, you had a sort of list of beliefs that people had, or things surrounding the creation. Maybe could you tell us different things that people are?
Yeah, so people tend to fall into kind of one of three categories. So you mentioned kind of young Earth creationists. So people who believe that the Earth is around 6,000 years old, and they arrive at that date by following the biblical genealogies back as far as insofar as kind of dates and age ranges are given, and that's how they arrive at that date. There's also kind of a camp that takes into account the scientific worldview, takes into theories of evolution, the kind of geological time frame of the world, based on kind of the scientific evidence that we have available to us, but says that whole process was initiated and guided by God's hand, and that's kind of an intelligent design approach. And then you have kind of the materialist, scientific reductionist worldview that says that no, all of our understanding of kind of geology, biology, human evolution is basically a product of time and matter and chance. So yeah, and again, there are subtleties and nuances within each of these positions, but generally people fall into one of those three.
What would you guys say is the most popular belief? Would you say evolution?
I think in today's world, you mean?
Yeah, in today's world. What
Yeah,
would
I would
you
say
say just from hearing or you're reading your stuff? What do most people lean towards? Because I know there's a different bunch of theories and stuff But the most I hear about anyways is evolution.
I think because we try to go for fact. People in this day of information, people try to seek out truth. And truth isn't just because someone said so. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so they're actually trying to look for scientific backing behind certain things and certain. And so I know a lot of my students when I was teaching, specifically science, it was a big topic of conversation was evolution. And people don't realize that the theory of evolution came up by two Catholic scientists. One was an Augustine friar, and one was Jean-Baptiste. He was a scientist, Catholic scientist. So I got the
Nice Catholic name.
Yeah.
Jean-Baptiste.
Gregor Mendel was evolution. And so he's an Augustine friar. And so he's a Catholic friar, and he came up with this theory. So the theory of evolution
is a Catholic thought.
Is a Catholic thought. It doesn't have to go against what Catholic Church teaches.
Yeah,
or against the Bible.
And on that same topic, like even just because you brought it up, I don't know his name, but I know the Big Bang Theory.
I have that one too.
You do?
Yeah,
because that's a Catholic. He was a Catholic priest.
He was a Belgian priest. Yeah,
Yeah.
Belgian
Catholic.
Catholic, but from Belgium.
Yeah,
That's all.
he was a Belgian priest. Yeah.
And so George Lemaitre.
Lemaitre. Yeah, that's right.
And so he came up with the Big Bang Theory, and again, not against the Catholic teaching, right? And so everything we have to look into it. And then there are people that don't know the Catholic teaching. I'm just going to say scientists that aren't Catholic, let's say, that just say, well, this disproves that God had a play in this. No, it doesn't. It has nothing to do with that, because like this priest and this Augustine monk came up with these theories and these thoughts. And again, they're all theories and thoughts because we can't prove them. But we can go with the Big Bang Theory. There are ways of going right up to a certain point. So we can track the creation of the universe to as much as we can. We can go back with the light. We can go see far, far back, and we can see universe still kind of being created back thousands and thousands of years, to the point where we can probably guesstimate what happened up to, I can't remember, it's a millionth of a second after the Big Bang. But we can't say what happened at the Big Bang. We don't know. And if you are a scientist, then you know that for some change to happen, there has to be an outside force acting upon what you're talking about. So if a ball is going to stay in the same state unless an outside force comes in and hits the ball, and then there's force translate. So if you think about that, the universe was in some state or wasn't existent, whatever the case was, and then some outside force. Well, what was that outside force? In the Catholic world, that was in Christian world, I should say. That's God. God came in and acted upon and was the force that put this whole thing into motion.
So would I be correct, Dr. Matt, of saying like Catholics are free to believe in the theory of the Big Bang Theory or the process of evolution, as long as we also acknowledge the fact that God was the major player here?
Yeah, exactly. So I think most Catholics would fall into the intelligent design camp that I mentioned. That really recognizing, the benefits that the scientific approach to acquiring knowledge has been. It allows us to kind of make those chains of causality, identify evidence, and evaluate it. It's funny that you mentioned kind of like a physics example, because one of the things, actually coming back to your question, that Catholics are free to believe either of these positions, kind of the young Earth creationism, as well as kind of the intelligent design, because these are theories. I'm more comfortable with kind of the intelligent design just because of the data and the fossil record. We have kind of physical scientific evidence that suggests that this is the case. But it's important to note that it really is an extrapolation of data that would be concerning or even really problematic for other aspects of science. So if you take something like a ball in motion or a physics example, that you can extrapolate data to a reasonable degree. You can take a ball, if you understand where its position, its vector, and its velocity, you can say reasonably where that ball is going to be in about 10 seconds, unless another force is acted upon it.
Something you can think of friction or something.
But as you increase that kind of time frame, your margin of error increases. So it was like you can tell where it's going to be in 10 seconds, but you can tell like maybe in a minute with less certainty.
An hour.
But when you start talking about time frames of a year,
millions of years.
So I think it's important to note that even the conclusions that we're drawing from kind of the
Science.
popular scientific worldview, when we're talking about evolution, when we're talking about cosmology, this is an extrapolation of data over orders of magnitude of what would be acceptable for normal kind of hard physical science.
So God created the world. How you believe that to be is kind of a discernment made by a good discernment. Made by the person. And like, again, I don't see any of these teachings to be in contradiction of science.
No.
And that's what Christians are accused of contradicting science, right?
So if we go back to the Bible and the creation story, first of all, to point out that there's Genesis 1, Genesis 2, there's two different creation stories in Genesis in the order that things were created. And so if we recognize that, if you haven't recognized that before, go and read it. It's right there in Genesis. But understanding that even that is just showing a different view or a different way of understanding what's going on. One of them was talking about the understanding of the time. So Genesis 1, they talk about a dome. There's light and then there's dark and then there's a dome of water. Well, they understood, the people 6,000 years ago that they came up, not that came up with this, but that were writing this stuff down, they were explaining to people, they didn't understand rain, right? They didn't understand stars. Stars look like holes in the sky. So, that's where the rain comes from. And so they talk about, okay, there's a dome over top and there must be water on top and there's water below. And this is how, so they were explaining science. There was some truth to this, but there was also their own interpretation as it kind of came through, which doesn't lend itself, it doesn't mean anything's wrong, but if you're going to take it literal, then there's a problem with it, right? And so can we see, even the story of evolution, if you look at evolution, it started in the waters, and then slowly moved, my boys and I were just talking about this because they were talking about, was there really such thing as, did we come out of the sea? And so we talked about the evolution part of things and talked about, because they saw something on History Channel about that. And so a little slime ball slowly start swimming, and then swimming, the fish came onto the land, and there was some kind of commercial with this all in it, and then to a person that's walking. And so they were asking me about it. So if you look at it, okay, there was stuff in the sea. And then eventually these things in the sea started to fly a little bit. And then the other ones just started to crawl up on land. So if you look at the creation story as it comes, it kind of actually follows that. The Genesis 1 actually follows that evolution. Do we know that it's 24 hours? A 24-hour day, when we say it's the first day, no, because the 24-hour day as we know it is different on the equator as it is in Alaska, right? We have a 6-month day in Alaska versus a 24-hour day, let's say, right on the equator.
Yeah, and how we maintain time today is different than how time was calculated
But
before,
they were talking about a period. So it doesn't matter if it was, could God have, I totally believe if God wanted to, he could have snapped his fingers and all happened in one day. It could have happened in 7 minutes for all I know.
Right.
But I do believe God has that power. But if God used that time, it was a specific amount of time, and this is what happened. And a specific amount of time, and then this is what happened.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking at Genesis, I think, that's the way to put it. It's what is the way in which this is true? Okay, so if you have competing narratives in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, that leads you to it supports the idea that it's figurative, allegorical, but not strictly that way. And there are some kind of interesting aspect that kind of dovetail, not like the Big Bang and the cosmological kind of beginning, those are actually really complementary. Well, when you're looking at biological evolution, that is Catholics are comfortable with the idea that God formed man from the dust of the earth.
Yes.
That it's and that there's a kind of an interesting.
How long did it take?
Yeah. Well, and you have I think it's Timothy in the New Testament talking about time for God is very different than time for a day can be 10,000 years or 10,000 years a day. Again, it's our best guess about what that actually, the implications that has on our understanding of Genesis. But the fact that the beginning of Genesis is written more like poetry than kind of direct factual historical narrative. It supports the idea. But then what becomes true about that? So God formed man from the dust of the earth and breathed into him the breath of life. That's something that the scientific worldview isn't really capable of describing. That it's at what point in the evolutionary process or something did humans develop self-reflexive consciousness and souls and that idea. So the way that Genesis is true is that it points us to some realities of the human condition that science just really can't account for, like the existence of evil, original sin, the fact that humanity fell at a certain point, and we believe that this was in the decisions made by Adam and Eve, and then what does that mean for the rest of human history, or how do those truths help us understand kind of the rest of the historical human history?
Yeah.
And what does that mean for us today?
Yeah, and I think that's important. That we can't just disregard,
Exactly.
depending on what you believe. You can't just throw out things like original sin, like you mentioned, right? The fall of humanity, Adam and Eve, right? So some people who would believe in evolution, or would say people like Adam and Eve did not exist, right? And the Catholic teaching on that, Matt, is that Adam and Eve did exist, right? It would be an error to say that they did not exist. Now, if the story, go ahead.
I was going to say, if there was no such thing, well, if there's no such thing as Adam and Eve, not Adam and Eve per se, but I mean, was their name Adam and Eve? I don't know. But if there wasn't those people that made that choice, and then if original sin wasn't that choice, you know what I mean? Then Jesus had no reason to come to earth to free us from original sin.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So there's a line there that you have to follow.
So the story of Adam and Eve, as it's in Genesis, what are we to take from that story?
That I think that humans were given the breath of life. We're given a soul, and then we're given the option to choose, and they chose, and because of their choice, original sin entered into the world.
So are you saying then that while we can't deny that the first people were created by God, this fall happened, right, where original sin came, but are people to believe the Adam and Eve story as written in the Genesis?
Well, I think they can, I think they can. I think that's, I mean, for me, when I talk about it, I think the devil was a snake. You know what I mean? Like, the devil could appear as a snake and talk to them. And there's a talking snake in the Garden of Eden, apparently. I don't know if there's talking lions. I don't know. But, like, I think you're allowed to believe that. I think what you have to believe is that the concepts around the Genesis story are true.
Exactly.
Right? And so whether Adam was the name of the guy or whether Eve was the name of the woman doesn't have to be correct necessarily.
Yeah, and that's what I talk about when I'm in classrooms and things like that. Yeah. That story of Adam and Eve shows to us so much about how God created the world, or how God created us. Yeah. Like we were created to be his ultimate creation. Yeah. And we took all the beautiful gifts. Imagine being in the garden, right? Like the perfect world before the fall. Yeah. Like that's the story for us, is to depict what God intended for us in life.
Paradise.
Heaven, paradise, exactly. And then just because, we're know-it-alls, or we're tempted and we think we're better than God, we fell. Yeah. And because that, sin has entered the world. So that's the beauty of that story that can't be thrown out if people subscribe to an evolution.
And if you're looking at that, what is the first sin of humanity? I think it's always a good one to figure out, because I know I fall in this all the time. But the first sin of humanity was pride, right? Was you'll be like God if you eat this fruit. And so, I want to be like God. It was like and so like the root of all evil is not money, it's pride. Right? If you look at most sins originate from a source of pride. Not always. I mean, the 7 deadly sins and stuff, but a lot of it, pride is a center of a lot of the not evil, but the sins, the things that we do that are not of God.
Right.
It revolves around our pride.
Yeah, and also another thing that I think we can't ignore or forget is that God created us in his image and likeness. And that, I think that story depicts that beautifully. Like just try and picture that story, the beauty, like probably the best looking man and the best looking woman. You know what I mean?
Without belly buttons.
And just this beautiful creation surrounding them. God gave them all these different things. They were just in their natural beauty, and then sin comes into the world.
Mhm.
You know,
And they
Um,
chose it.
and they chose it.
I think that's important. And because of that, that's where God does say, okay, I'm gonna have to fix this now. um, and there's going to be labor, and there's going to be like you've chosen pain basically, and so there's going to be that you're going to have to labor, you're going to have to toil for your food and that kind of stuff, as well as women, you're going to labor through labor, and that kind of.
I, and maybe people don't have a really great understanding of original sin either, right? But the stain of that action, the stain of evil and sin into the world, is like every time we welcome someone into the church, we baptize someone, and you talk about removing that stain of original sin. You just feel parents and godparents being like,
What?
like, yeah, like what this baby, my brother and my sister-in-law just had a baby a few days ago, and so congratulations to
Innocent
them.
baby.
Innocent baby, yeah. So picture them, being like, what? Why are we removing a sin from this baby?
Yeah.
When we're baptized, but that's the stain of original sin, and I try to explain to people that the baby is not guilty of any sin, but that the stain, being born into a world where sin exists, breathing in that air of a world that's sort of infiltrated by sin, is sort of the best way. Hey, do you think people have a?
Yeah, I think, well, and bringing it back to the Genesis narrative, that this is the entry point of sin into the world. Before that, it was intended to be kind of idyllic, the kind of the perfection of humanity. Is that action marked the rest of human history with a mark of sin, and like the strongest evidence for that is kind of human history, that there's been an inclination towards sin. So being born into that world, even if there's no like direct culpability of the child, that it's like it's pretty clear that when you look out at the world, there are agents who are wanting to put themselves in the position of God, or wanting to exact power and knowledge over other people. So yeah, at baptism, acknowledging that that's the world we're born into, and that we're actually called to that prior perfection, and that's what we should strive for.
So what I'm taking away from today is that these theories that people are always saying are in contradiction of the Christian faith
Absolutely.
are actually theories started by Catholics.
Yeah, for sure.
And the influence that Catholics had in this world. Also, for those Catholics are free to believe in evolution, free to believe in the Big Bang theory, free to believe the creation story, right? And we acknowledge that God is the major player here of creation. And also in the evolution process, I think it's important to note where souls come in, right?
Yeah.
Like the difference between humans and animals, or whatever it is. Like God creates souls.
Was it Pius
the 12th?
12th that talks about like we can believe in evolution and Big Bang and all this, because that all came out around his time. He said like, all these things are things that we can believe in. He's a pope. He says we can believe these things as Catholics, but we have to. I wrote down Pius the 12th. Souls are created by God. That's the big thing here, is to realize that souls weren't evolved. You didn't evolve into souls. No, souls were created by God. And that's what the church teaches with evolution.
And the way that he puts it too, I think, is important. That there's a great freedom in what we're allowed to believe. That there's no intrinsic conflict between biological evolution and the fact that we're created by God. He's saying that like the perception that these are in conflict is just a perception, and that you can believe based on scientific evidence this is the way it went, or this is the way it went. We just don't have the data. We don't have the certainty in what human history looked like before a certain point. So this is left to our discernment, our interpretation of history, our interpretation of scientific data. But insofar as the Pope and the theology of the Church is concerned, these are the important things, that we're made in the image and likeness of God, we fell, and that gives kind of significance to the whole of human history.
And to address those topics in 1950, when that document came out, it was pretty cool of the Church to talk about those things, because it was probably mind-blowing for a lot of Catholics, and maybe even the outside world looking into the Catholic Church.
I think more so now because people would feel like, don't ask me questions about it. Like there's been a generation gap there where it was, don't ask me questions about it, I don't understand it. God created the world. And that was the end of discussion, I think, a lot of times. So the Catholic or Christian persona became, God created the world. There is no such thing as evolution.
Right.
But that's not what the church teaches.
That's not what the church teaches. So we're running out of time. This has been a good conversation about it because I don't think we talk about it enough. A challenge for people, I would say, maybe to go over these books of Genesis, maybe to read chapter 1, 2, 3 of Genesis, to really reflect on that. Yeah. If you can find a copy of the Pope's document, I'm sure it's available online. Maybe that's
Pope Pius the 12th. Pius the 12th. Humani
Generis.
Something like that. The other one too is to look up just real quick. Is because scientifically, the Eve gene. The Eve gene. There's a proof. There's proof in our genome that we all came from one woman. Doesn't mean that necessarily it's Eve, because if you go by the Bible story, I mean that could be Noah's wife, right? Because we're all descended from that. If you're taking everything literally, but that's some cool science in that Eve gene as well.
So lots of stuff to read up on and
take a look.
Hey, so that's all the time we have. Thanks for this conversation. Thanks for getting together, guys, and talking more on this episode of the Catholic Buzz. Again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, suggestions for future episodes, send us an email at thecatholicbuzzpodcast@gmail.com. So for Josh Sullivan and Dr. Matt Van Milligan, I'm Father Daniele. We'll see you next time on the Catholic Buzz.